Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. So today we're going to be looking at some global events, kind of drawing from
hmm
some news scripts and briefing notes. So
Yeah.
kind of try to get a concise overview of a few things that are happening.
I think it's interesting when you see these events that seem disconnected on the surface,
Yeah,
but then you see this larger pattern playing out.
yeah. No, I agree with you on that, and I think a good place to start is this whole Delta Flight 1759, the emergency landing that happened in Toronto. It could have been much worse.
Yeah.
Everyone survived, the passengers and crew, but 80 people having serious injuries, I mean, that's not a small thing either.
Right. And it makes you think about how even an incident like this, has global implications, right?
Hmm.
You got supply chains for aircraft parts, international safety regulations, pilot training programs, all feeding into aviation safety.
Yeah.
And when one thing goes wrong, it can really ripple outwards.
I totally agree. And it's pretty intense when you see the footage of the passengers and crew evacuating the plane. I mean, you can't help but wonder about the psychological impact of something like that on everyone involved.
Yeah.
So it's just a stark reminder of the inherent risks we face when we travel by air.
And that's a good segue into what we're talking about today, those larger patterns of tension and uncertainty that we see, playing out around the world.
Yeah.
We're going to look at three key areas. One is Israel's continued military presence in southern Lebanon.
Okay.
We're also going to be looking at the ongoing peace talks surrounding the conflict in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll finish up by looking at the rising geopolitical tension around Okinawa and the strategic military bases that are there.
Okay, so let's start with that first one then, the situation in southern Lebanon. I mean, one of the things that really stood out to me in the briefing notes was the human cost of this conflict.
Yeah?
The suspected weapons smuggling by Hezbollah,
Right.
has led to a lot of displacement and fear.
And there was that one quote that really hit home for me where a resident said that it's basically like living in a war zone.
Yeah, that is a powerful quote.
And it just highlights what people are dealing with on a daily basis in that region.
Yeah, and then on top of all of that, you have Israel's decision to maintain its military presence in southern Lebanon. And, this has obviously, further inflamed tensions.
Of course, yeah.
And we even saw Lebanon's prime minister designate Ali Bachara come out and condemn Israel's actions, calling it a violation of Lebanon's sovereignty.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a complicated situation. It's got such a long and tangled history. And the UN is now calling for increased peacekeeping patrols to try to de-escalate.
Right.
But, I mean, is that going to be enough? Could that even make things worse?
Those are some really good questions. And, it just highlights how challenging it can be to achieve lasting peace in a region that has such deep-rooted conflicts.
Absolutely.
So, speaking of complex conflicts, we've got the situation in Ukraine. And we're seeing some progress with peace talks, but at the same time, there's this new wave of sanctions looming against Russia.
Yeah.
It's like a delicate balancing act.
It feels like it, right?
Uh-huh.
And the stakes are so high.
Mm.
These sanctions they're talking about, they're not messing around. We're talking asset freezing and transaction restrictions that target major Russian banks.
Yeah.
That's a significant escalation of economic pressure.
Yeah. And it's not just the sanctions. You've got NATO allies adding to the pressure, too, saying there'll be even stronger actions if Russia doesn't back down.
It's like this big geopolitical chess match going on.
Mm-hmm.
And, meanwhile, there's this horrific humanitarian crisis unfolding in Ukrainian cities like Donetsk and Mariupol.
Yeah.
You got civilians trapped, resources are dwindling, the human cost is just unimaginable.
And it's easy to forget that, behind all of these big geopolitical maneuvers, there are real people who are suffering.
Of course, yeah.
And, we're seeing President Volodymyr Zelensky desperately calling for urgent discussions. And it looks like France might step in as a mediator.
It's a good sign, right? Because Dr. Anna Ivanova, she's an expert in international relations, and she warns that the next few days are going to be critical.
Yeah.
They'll determine whether we can find a diplomatic solution or not.
It sounds like we're approaching a tipping point.
Yeah.
Every decision, every action taken from here on out, it could have huge consequences for the future of Ukraine and the wider world.
Absolutely.
So before we move on to Okinawa, I'm curious about these economic sanctions. Do you think they're the right move? I mean, are they actually going to pressure Russia towards peace, or could they backfire and make a diplomatic solution even harder?
That's a really good question. And it's a tough one, right? Because there are definitely strong arguments to be made on both sides. On the one hand,
That's a really good point. I mean, it's almost like you're trying to predict the ripples in a pond after you've thrown in a rock, right?
yeah, exactly.
So, okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Okinawa.
Okay.
I have to admit, Okinawa isn't really a place that's, top of mind for me. So why are we even talking about it? Like, what's the connection to all of this?
Well, Okinawa might seem a little far removed geographically from what's going on in Lebanon and Ukraine, but it's actually a pretty key piece of this whole geopolitical puzzle.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that it's home to a number of strategically important military bases,
Okay.
especially along the coastline. And these bases have been attracting a lot of attention from neighboring countries.
Okay, I see. So who exactly do these bases belong to?
Well, most of them are U.S. military installations.
Okay.
They've had a significant presence on the island ever since World War II.
Right, World War II. Okinawa was a major battleground, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was one of the most brutal battles in the Pacific Theater.
Wow.
It lasted for 82 days and resulted in huge casualties on both sides,
Yeah.
including a large number of the local Okinawan population.
Oh.
The island was just devastated.
That's just heartbreaking. It sounds like Okinawa has been kind of caught in the middle of these global conflicts for a really long time.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. And to really understand the complexities of the situation today, we need to dig a little deeper into Okinawa's history.
Okay, let's do that. So give me some historical context. What led to those bases being there in the first place?
Well, before World War II, Okinawa wasn't actually part of Japan in the same way that it is today.
Okay.
It existed for centuries as the Ryukyu Kingdom,
Yeah.
which was this independent entity known for its maritime trade and its unique culture.
So it had its own, like, distinct identity and history.
Exactly, yeah. But then in 1879, Japan formally annexed Okinawa, making it a prefecture.
Okay.
But this annexation was really controversial, and it kind of set the stage for a lot of the tension that we see today.
So even back then, there were questions about where Okinawa fit in.
Yeah, and after World War II, things just got even more complicated.
That's
Well, instead of being returned to Japan, Okinawa remained under U.S. administration for almost 3 decades.
Wow, really?
Yeah. It wasn't until 1972 that it was finally returned to Japanese control.
So they've got this whole history of being caught between these different powers. It's no wonder there's so much sensitivity surrounding their role now.
Exactly, yeah. And so, fast forward to today,
Yeah.
and you've got China's rise as a global power
Right.
and China's growing military, particularly its naval activities. That's caused concern for a lot of countries,
Yeah.
including Japan and the United States.
So Okinawa is right in the middle of all of that.
Yeah, and that brings us back to those U.S. military bases.
Okay.
They're seen as really important to the U.S. strategy to counter China's influence.
That's right.
But at the same time, they also make Okinawa a potential target in any future conflict.
Yeah, okay. So we're starting to see how things are getting a little complicated here.
Right.
You've got China's assertiveness, U.S. military presence, and then Okinawa stuck right in the middle.
Yeah.
Is there anything else adding fuel to the fire here?
Well, there's also the issue of territorial disputes.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most contentious ones involves the Senkaku Islands. They're this small, uninhabited archipelago
Okay.
located in the East China Sea.
The Senkaku Islands. I think I remember hearing something about those. Remind me, what's the story with them?
So both Japan and China claim sovereignty over them,
Okay.
and it's been a long-standing source of tension between the two.
Okay.
They may be small and uninhabited,
Yeah.
but they're strategically valuable because of their location. They're believed to have rich fishing grounds
Okay.
and potentially a lot of untapped energy resources.
So they're a big deal.
Yeah, huge. And on top of all of that, you have the U.S., which recognizes Japan's administration of the islands,
Okay.
but they're also obligated to defend Japan's claim to them because of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty.
So if things escalate with the Senkaku Islands,
Yeah.
it could pull the U.S. into a conflict with China.
That's the worry.
Right.
And it all comes back to Okinawa because it would become a key staging ground in any potential conflict.
So, for the people of Okinawa, this isn't just some abstract thing happening, on the other side of the world.
Well,
this is their safety.
Absolutely.
This is their livelihood. This is their culture, right?
Exactly. They're stuck in the middle of these powerful forces.
Yeah.
And their voices often get lost in the bigger picture.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that behind all these global events and, the headlines and the politics, there are real people whose lives are directly impacted by these events.
Yeah. And so that brings us to a crucial question. How do we navigate this complex and volatile landscape in a way that prioritizes peace and stability, for Okinawa and for the rest of the world.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
That's for sure. We started with, what seemed like a pretty isolated incident with Delta Flight 1759, and then we went deep into, these brewing tensions in Lebanon,
Right.
and then a potential powder keg in Ukraine. And now we've got this incredibly complex situation surrounding Okinawa. I gotta say, I'm starting to feel a little overwhelmed by all of this.
I get it. It's easy to feel kind of powerless when we're looking at these global forces that are so much bigger than us.
Yeah.
But, I think it's important to remember that even as individuals, we're not completely helpless.
Okay, so what can we do? Should I be stocking up on supplies, building a bunker in my backyard?
Well, I wouldn't recommend going that far just yet. But there are definitely things we can do to face these uncertain times in a more informed way.
Okay, so what can we do? Where do we start?
Well, I think the first and most important thing is to stay informed.
Mm,
And that means going beyond just the headlines and really trying to get a variety of perspectives on these issues. It's so easy to get caught up in, our own little echo chambers, especially on social media.
yeah.
But it's really crucial that we expose ourselves to different viewpoints.
So basically, we need to be more critical of the information that we're taking in.
Yeah, exactly. We need to question our assumptions, double-check the facts, and be really wary of propaganda and misinformation, fake news.
Yeah.
That means checking our sources, thinking about who benefits from a certain story being told,
Mm.
and being skeptical of anything that seems too good to be true or too simple.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. But sometimes staying informed just feels kind of passive. Like, is there anything we can do beyond just reading and listening?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We can engage in conversations, talk to each other, both online and offline.
Okay.
And that means really being open to listening to people who have different viewpoints,
Yeah.
even when we don't agree with them,
Right.
and trying to understand where they're coming from.
That sounds really challenging, especially these days when everything feels so polarized.
It's not easy,
Mm.
but I think it's more important now than ever.
Yeah.
We have to try to foster empathy and understanding, even when it's hard. And that means approaching these conversations with curiosity instead of judgment, asking questions so that we can understand each other's perspectives, and just being willing to acknowledge that other people's experiences are valid, even if we don't agree with their conclusions.
So building bridges instead of walls.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We need to remember that we're all part of this global community,
Mm-hmm.
and the problems that we're facing, they require us to work together to find solutions.
I like that. It's a good message. It helps us to feel like we can actually do something instead of feeling helpless.
And that's what I'm hoping people take away from this deep dive today.
Yeah.
We might not be able to solve all these problems on our own,
Mm-hmm.
but we can choose how we react to them.
Yeah.
We can choose to be informed and engaged and compassionate. And by doing those things, we can help to create a more peaceful and sustainable world for all of us.
Well said. And to everyone listening out there, we hope that this deep dive has given you some things to think about
Yeah.
and maybe even inspired you to take action in your own way.
Even small actions can make a difference. So keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
That's it for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll catch you next time right here on the Deep Dive.